The day Frances left me standing at the altar, I made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. I blocked her number, deleted every trace of her existence from my phone, and walked out of that chapel without looking back. Everyone expected me to chase her, to beg for answers, to demand an explanation for why she abandoned me in front of 300 guests. But I did none of those things. My silence became my weapon, and it cut deeper than any words ever could. She thought she could run to Henry, fix whatever mess he had gotten himself into, and then come back to find me waiting like a loyal dog. She thought wrong. Because while she was out there playing hero for another man, I was making a choice that would change everything. I was choosing myself. I was choosing my dignity. And I was choosing someone who actually valued what I had to offer. The wedding continued that day, just not with the bride everyone expected. When Frances finally realized what she had lost, when she finally came crawling back with tears streaming down her face and apologies tumbling from her lips, it was already too late. My ring was on someone else's finger. My future was planned with someone else. And my heart, the one she had taken for granted for so many years, had found a new home. She stood outside my door in the pouring rain, begging me to listen, to understand, to forgive. But I had given her my forgiveness the moment she walked away. What I couldn't give her was a second chance. She had made her choice when she chose him over me, when she decided his emergency was more important than our lifetime commitment, when she valued his tears over my humiliation. Now she would have to live with the consequences. And as I watched her from my window, drenched and desperate, I felt nothing but a cold sense of justice. This is the story of how my silence became her punishment, how my absence became her obsession, and how the man she abandoned became the one thing she could never have again. My name is Matthew, and for 28 years of my life, I believed I understood what love meant. I thought love was patient, kind, and forgiving. I thought love meant standing by someone through their worst moments, supporting their decisions even when they hurt you, and always giving them the benefit of the doubt. Frances taught me that I was wrong about all of it. We met during our final year at university, in a literature class where we were both forced to analyze romantic poetry that neither of us particularly enjoyed. She sat 2 rows ahead of me, always arriving exactly 5 minutes late, always carrying a coffee cup that was far too large for any reasonable person to finish, and always asking questions that made our professor pause and reconsider his own interpretations. I was fascinated by her immediately. Not because she was beautiful, though she certainly was, but because she seemed utterly unaware of the effect she had on everyone around her. She moved through the world with this effortless confidence that made you want to either be her or be with her. I chose the latter. Our relationship developed slowly, carefully, like 2 people learning a new language together. She told me about her childhood, about growing up with parents who valued achievement over affection, about always feeling like she had to prove herself worthy of love, rather than simply receiving it. I told her about my family, about the small business my father had built from nothing, about the pressure I felt to honor his legacy while also forging my own path. We understood each other in ways that felt rare and precious. When I proposed to her 3 years into our relationship, on a beach at sunset because I knew she would roll her eyes at the cliché, while secretly loving every moment of it, she said yes, without hesitation. She told me I was her person, her safe place, the one constant in a world that always felt too chaotic and demanding. I believed her completely. The wedding planning process revealed sides of Frances I had never seen before. She was meticulous about every detail, spending hours debating between ivory and cream-colored napkins, interviewing 7 different photographers before finding one whose style captured exactly what she envisioned, and creating elaborate spreadsheets that tracked our budget down to the last penny. I found it endearing. This need for control. Because I understood it came from a place of wanting everything to be perfect. She wanted our wedding day to be flawless because she wanted our marriage to start on the strongest possible foundation. I supported every decision, attended every cake tasting, and smiled through every meeting with vendors who charged obscene amounts of money for services that seemed absurdly simple. I did it all because I loved her, and because I genuinely believed we were building something that would last forever. But there was always Henry. He existed in the periphery of our relationship like a shadow that never quite disappeared, no matter how bright we tried to make our own light. Frances had known Henry since childhood, their families connected through some complicated web of business relationships and social obligations that I never fully understood. She described him as helpless, as someone who needed guidance and protection because he lacked the basic skills to navigate adult life successfully. He called her constantly with problems that ranged from genuinely serious to absurdly trivial. His girlfriend cheated on him, and Frances spent 3 hours on the phone talking him through his heartbreak. He got fired from his job, and Frances helped him revise his resume and prepare for interviews. He locked himself out of his apartment. And Frances drove across the city at midnight to bring him her spare key. Every single time, she framed it as obligation rather than choice. As something she had to do rather than wanted to do. And every single time, I swallowed my discomfort and told myself I was being unreasonable, that jealousy was beneath me, that trusting her meant accepting all of her, including her complicated relationship with Henry. My friends warned me. David, my best friend since elementary school, pulled me aside 2 months before the wedding and asked me directly if I was sure about marrying someone who seemed to prioritize another man's needs over my own comfort. I laughed it off, told him he was being dramatic, insisted that Frances loved me and that Henry was just a friend who happened to be particularly needy. David shook his head and said something I would remember later. When everything fell apart, he said, "Matthew, love is not just about what people say or even what they feel. It is about what they do, about the choices they make when those choices actually cost them something. Watch what she does, not what she says." At the time, I thought he was being cynical. Later, I would realize he was being realistic. The week before our wedding, Frances seemed distracted. She stared at her phone during dinner, responded to my questions with vague half-answers, and went to bed early, claiming exhaustion from all the final preparations. I attributed it to pre-wedding stress, to the natural anxiety that comes with making such a significant life commitment. I gave her space, assured her that everything would be perfect, and tried to project the calm confidence I thought she needed from me. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that Henry had started calling her again with a new crisis, one that would ultimately destroy everything we had built together. His ex-girlfriend, the one who had cheated on him and broken his heart, had apparently started harassing him. According to Henry, she was threatening him, showing up at his apartment uninvited, and making his life unbearable. He told Frances he was scared, that he did not know what to do, that she was the only person who could help him. And Frances, being exactly who she had always been, started planning how to rescue him instead of telling him to handle his own problems like an adult. The morning of our wedding arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, and the kind of gentle warmth that made everything feel possible. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by my groomsmen who had stayed over for what they called bachelor bonding but what mostly involved eating pizza and watching terrible action movies until 2 in the morning. David made coffee while the others argued about proper tie-tying techniques, and for a few hours, everything felt exactly as it should. I was marrying the woman I loved, surrounded by people who cared about me, stepping into a future that felt bright and full of promise. I had no idea that within hours, everything would collapse. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon at a historic chapel that Frances had fallen in love with the moment she saw it. The venue was perfect, all exposed brick and tall windows that let in streams of golden sunlight, with enough space for our 300 guests and the elaborate floral arrangements Frances had spent months planning. I arrived 2 hours early because I wanted to oversee the final setup, to make sure every detail matched what Frances had envisioned. The photographer captured me adjusting bouquets and straightening chairs, laughing with my groomsmen and greeting early arrivals. Those photos would later feel like evidence from another life, proof that a version of me had once existed who believed in happy endings. Frances was supposed to arrive at 3:30 for pre-ceremony photos. At 3:20, her maid of honor called me. Her voice tight with barely controlled panic. She said Frances was running late, that there had been some kind of issue with her dress, but that everything would be fine and I should not worry. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because the alternative was unthinkable. At 3:45, with guests starting to take their seats and the string quartet playing soft music that was meant to create ambience but instead created tension, her maid of honor called again. This time, her voice was different. This time, she sounded scared. She said, "Matthew, Frances is not here. She left about an hour ago and said she would be right back, but she is not answering her phone. I need you to stay calm, but I think something might be wrong." I remember the way my heart started pounding. The way my hands went cold despite the warmth of the afternoon. I told myself there had been an accident, that her car had broken down, that her phone had died and she was frantically trying to find a way to contact me. I did not allow myself to consider that she might have left intentionally, that she might have chosen not to come. David found me standing alone in the groom's suite, staring at my phone and willing it to ring. He did not say anything, just stood beside me in that solid, steady way he had, offering his presence as support. At 4:15, with every seat filled and 300 people whispering amongst themselves and shooting me pitying looks that I pretended not to notice, my phone finally rang. It was Frances. Her voice was breathless and panicked when she answered, and I could hear traffic sounds in the background that told me she was in a car, driving somewhere that was definitely not toward our wedding. Before I could ask where she was or what was happening, she started talking rapidly. words tumbling over each other in her rush to explain. She said, "Matthew, I am so sorry, I know this is terrible timing, but Henry called and he is in serious trouble. His ex-girlfriend, the crazy one I told you about, she has completely lost it. She hired people to kidnap him, and they are demanding money, and he is terrified and he needs my help. I have to go get him, I have to make sure he is safe. I will be back as soon as I can. I promise, the wedding can wait just a little bit. Everyone will understand." I stood there in my wedding suit, holding my phone with a grip so tight, my knuckles turned white, listening to the woman I was supposed to marry tell me that another man's emergency was more important than our wedding day. I asked her, my voice surprisingly calm considering the chaos I felt inside, whether she understood what she was doing. Whether she realized she was abandoning me in front of everyone we knew for someone who always seemed to have a crisis that only she could solve. She got defensive immediately, her tone shifting from apologetic to irritated as she said I was being unreasonable, that this was life or death, that Henry could actually die if she did not help him. She said she loved me. That I should know that by now. That as soon as she made sure Henry was safe, she would come straight back and we would get married just like we planned. I asked her one question, just one, and her answer would determine everything that came next. I said, "Francis, if you leave me now, if you choose him over me on our wedding day, do you understand that I will not wait for you?" She went silent for a moment, and I could hear her breathing, could imagine her face doing the thing it did when she was trying to decide between what she wanted to do and what she thought she should do. Then she said, in a voice that was quieter but no less certain, "I have to go, Matthew. I love you, but I have to go. He needs me." And with those words, she made her choice. I walked back into the chapel where 300 people were waiting, where my parents sat in the front row, looking confused and concerned. Where David stood with the other groomsmen ready to fulfill his duties in a ceremony that was no longer going to happen. The officiant approached me, asking in a low voice whether we should make an announcement or wait a bit longer, and I realized that everyone was looking at me, waiting for me to make a decision about how to handle this public humiliation. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, something fundamental and irreversible. I had spent years accommodating Frances, understanding her need to help Henry, swallowing my discomfort for the sake of keeping peace. I had told myself that love meant sacrifice, that relationships required compromise, that her intentions were good even when her choices hurt me. But standing there in front of everyone, abandoned on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I finally understood what David had been trying to tell me. Love is about choices, and Frances had just shown me exactly where I ranked in hers. The silence in the chapel was deafening as I stood there trying to process what had just happened. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, waiting for an explanation, waiting for me to tell them whether the bride was coming or whether they had just witnessed the most spectacular rejection of their lives. My mother's face had gone pale. My father looked like he wanted to find Henry and personally demonstrate what happens to men who interfere with other people's weddings. And David was already moving toward me with the clear intention of getting me out of there before I completely fell apart, but I did not fall apart. That was the strangest thing. I expected to feel devastated, broken, like my entire world had just crumbled into pieces too small to ever reassemble. Instead, I felt cold, clear-headed, almost detached from the situation, as if I was watching it happen to someone else rather than living through it myself. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was denial. But in that moment, I felt something that surprised me more than the abandonment itself. I felt relief. It was a terrible thing to realize, standing there in my wedding suit, with everyone staring at me with pity and confusion. But I could not deny the truth of it. Some part of me, some part I had been suppressing for months or maybe even years, was relieved that I did not have to marry someone who would always put Henry first. I did not have to spend the rest of my life wondering when the next crisis would come, when the next phone call would pull her away from me, when I would again have to smile and pretend I was fine with being second choice. The relief lasted approximately 30 seconds before the anger hit, and when it hit, it was like nothing I had ever experienced before. It was not the hot, explosive kind of anger that makes you yell and throw things. It was cold and calculating, the kind of anger that sits in your chest like ice and makes every thought sharp and purposeful. I pulled out my phone and did something I had never done before. I blocked Frances's number. I went into my contacts, found her name with the little heart emoji she had added herself, and I blocked her. Then I went through my social media and removed her from everything. I deleted our photos, unfollowed her accounts, and systematically erased every digital trace of our relationship. David watched me do it with an expression that was equal parts concern and approval. He said, "Matthew, what are you doing?" And I looked at him and said, "I am moving on." He nodded slowly, then asked what I wanted to do about the 300 people sitting in the chapel waiting for answers. I took a deep breath and said, Tell them the wedding is postponed due to an emergency. Tell them we apologize for the inconvenience. Tell them anything except the truth, because I am not giving them the satisfaction of knowing she chose someone else over me. My parents found me 20 minutes later in the groom's suite, sitting on a leather couch and staring at nothing. My mother immediately tried to hug me, but I gently stopped her because I knew if she hugged me, if she showed me that kind of maternal compassion, I would break down completely, and I could not afford to break down yet. My father, always the practical one, asked what I needed from them. I said I needed them to handle the guests, to make sure everyone left peacefully, and to not tell anyone what really happened. I said I would handle Frances when she came back, that this was between her and me, and that I did not want their anger or their interference. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but my mother put her hand on his arm and shook her head. She understood, in that intuitive way mothers sometimes do, that I needed to deal with this in my own way. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that I barely registered. The venue staff needed instructions about the untouched food and the elaborate cake that no one would eat. The photographer asked whether I wanted the pre-ceremony photos he had taken, and I told him to delete everything. The florist wanted to know what to do with the hundreds of flowers that had been arranged so carefully, and I told her to donate them to a hospital or throw them away. I did not care which. Every decision felt surreal, like I was planning the funeral of a relationship rather than dealing with a postponed wedding. David stayed with me through all of it, handling the details I could not bring myself to care about, running interference with well-meaning relatives who wanted to check on me, and occasionally reminding me to breathe when I forgot that breathing was something I needed to do. By 8 o'clock that evening, the chapel was empty except for David and me. We sat in the front row where my parents had been sitting just hours earlier, surrounded by the decorations Frances had chosen so carefully, and David finally asked the question I had been dreading. He said, "What are you going to do when she comes back?" I had been thinking about nothing else for the past 4 hours, turning the question over and over in my mind, examining it from every possible angle. Frances would come back, I knew that with absolute certainty. She would rescue Henry from whatever manufactured crisis he had created. She would realize what she had done, and she would come back expecting me to forgive her. She would apologize profusely, she would cry and explain and promise it would never happen again. And she would expect our relationship to continue as if this was just another bump in the road rather than a fundamental betrayal of everything we were supposed to mean to each other. I looked at David and said, I am not going to do anything. I am not going to answer her calls, I am not going to respond to her messages, I am not going to give her the confrontation she expects. I am going to move on with my life as if she never existed. David raised his eyebrows and said, "You really think you can do that? You really think you can just walk away from someone you were about to marry?" I said, "Watch me." And I meant it. I had spent too many years accommodating Frances, too many months swallowing my discomfort about Henry, too many hours convincing myself that her intentions mattered more than her actions. I was done. I was done being understanding, done being patient, done being the person who always bent, so she never had to break. If she wanted to choose Henry over me, then she could have him. But she could not have both. That night, I stayed at David's apartment because I could not face going back to the home Frances and I had been planning to share. I lay awake on his uncomfortable couch, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of our relationship in my mind. I thought about all the times she had canceled our plans because Henry needed something, all the conversations we had cut short because he called with another emergency. All the moments when I had felt like I was competing for her attention rather than simply receiving it as her partner. I had convinced myself that I was being supportive, that good partners do not make their loved ones choose between them and their friends. But Henry was not just a friend, and Frances's relationship with him was not just friendship. I did not think they were having an affair, at least not a physical one, but there was an emotional intimacy between them that had always made me uncomfortable. And I had ignored that discomfort because acknowledging it would have meant confronting truths I was not ready to face. Around 3 in the morning, my phone started buzzing with calls from an unknown number. I knew it was Frances, trying to reach me from someone else's phone since I had blocked hers. I let it ring. It rang 7 times before finally stopping, and in the silence that followed, I felt something settle in my chest. This was the right choice. Walking away from someone who had shown me so clearly that I was not her priority was the right choice, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how many years we had invested in each other. David heard the phone ringing and came out of his bedroom, looking concerned. He said, "That was her, was not it?" And I nodded. He asked if I wanted to talk about it, and I shook my head. There was nothing to talk about. Frances had made her decision, and now I was making mine. 3 days passed before Frances showed up at my apartment. I had gone back despite my initial reluctance, because I refused to let her drive me out of my own home. I had spent those 3 days in a strange state of productive numbness, methodically packing up everything that belonged to her or reminded me of her. Boxing up photos and gifts, and all the accumulated debris of a 5-year relationship. David came over to help, not saying much but providing the kind of solid presence that made it possible to keep moving forward. We were in the middle of taking down a shelf full of books we had collected together, arguing about which ones were mine and which were hers, when the buzzer rang. David looked at me and said, "Do you want me to get rid of her?" And I shook my head. This conversation needed to happen eventually, and delaying it would only prolong the inevitable. I opened the door to find Frances looking worse than I had ever seen her. Her hair was messy, her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing on our wedding day, now wrinkled and stained. She looked at me with such desperate hope that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She said, "Matthew, thank God, I have been trying to reach you for days. Why did you block my number? We need to talk about what happened." I stepped aside to let her in, not because I wanted to hear her excuses but because I did not want to have this conversation where my neighbors could hear it. She rushed past me, already talking rapidly about Henry and the kidnapping and how terrified she had been, how she had no choice but to go help him, how it was a matter of life and death. I let her talk, watching her pace back and forth in my living room, gesticulating wildly as she tried to justify the unjustifiable. When she finally ran out of steam and stopped to take a breath, I said, very calmly, "I do not care." She froze mid-step and stared at me like I had just spoken a foreign language. She said, "What do you mean you do not care?" "Matthew. I was almost killed. Henry was kidnapped. This was serious." I repeated. Slower this time, so she would be sure to understand. "I do not care about Henry. I do not care about his kidnapping. I do not care about his crazy ex-girlfriend. And I do not care about any of the drama that follows him around like a cloud. What I care about is that on our wedding day, when you were supposed to be marrying me, you left me standing in front of 300 people because he called you." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand to stop her. I was not finished. I said, "You made a choice, Frances, and now I am making mine. We are done." Her face went white, and she actually stumbled backward like my words had physically pushed her. She said, "You cannot be serious. You cannot just end 5 years because of one mistake. Because I tried to help someone who was in danger." I almost laughed at her characterization of abandoning me at our wedding as one mistake, as if it was something small and forgivable, like forgetting an anniversary or being late to dinner. I said, "It was not one mistake, it was a pattern. And our wedding day was just the moment when I finally saw it clearly. Every time Henry called, you went running. Every time he had a crisis, you dropped everything, including me. I have spent years coming second to him, and I am done with it." She started crying then, big dramatic sobs that would have moved me a week ago but now just made me tired. She said, "I love you, Matthew. I have always loved you. Henry means nothing to me compared to you." I shook my head and said, "If that were true, you would have married me 3 days ago." She tried to argue, tried to explain again about the kidnapping and the danger. But I cut her off. I said, "Frances, even if everything you are saying is true, even if Henry's life really was in danger, the fact remains that you chose to save him instead of marrying me. You made that choice consciously and deliberately, and now you have to live with the consequences." She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in desperately, and said, "Please. Matthew, please do not do this. We can work through this. I will make it up to you. I will do anything." I gently removed her hand from my arm and said, "There is nothing to work through. I am not angry. I am not trying to punish you, I am simply done. This is over." What happened next shocked both of us. The door to my bedroom opened, and Emily walked out. Emily was Frances's younger sister, and she had always existed on the periphery of our relationship, someone I knew but never really paid attention to. She was quieter than Frances, more reserved, with a dry sense of humor and an observational intelligence that made you feel like she saw more than she let on. She had been at the wedding, sitting in the family section with the rest of Frances's relatives, and I vaguely remembered seeing her leave early, before the full extent of the disaster became clear. What I had not known, what Frances definitely did not know, was that Emily had come to check on me the day after the wedding. She had shown up at my door with food and genuine concern, and we had ended up talking for hours about everything and nothing, and somehow she had just stayed. It was not romantic, not yet, but there was something there, some connection that had formed in the aftermath of Frances's betrayal. Emily understood without me having to explain why I could not forgive her sister. Why the abandonment had cut so deeply. Why I needed to walk away completely. She had told me things about Frances that I had never known, patterns of behavior that went back to their childhood. A tendency to create drama and then position herself as the hero who solved it. Emily had watched her sister do this their entire lives, and she had watched Henry enable it, and she had apparently been waiting for years for someone to finally call Frances on it. Now, seeing Emily walk out of my bedroom wearing one of my shirts, Frances's face went from devastated to furious in approximately 2 seconds. She screamed, "Are you kidding me? You are sleeping with my sister." And I said, very calmly, "What I do now is none of your business. We are not together anymore." Frances turned on Emily with a viciousness I had never seen before, calling her names I will not repeat, accusing her of betrayal and manipulation, and deliberately trying to steal me. Emily, to her credit, did not engage. She just looked at her sister with something like pity and said, "I am not stealing anything. Frances, you threw him away. I am just making sure he knows that not everyone in your family is incapable of putting him first." That was when Frances completely lost it, lunging at Emily with clear intent to do physical harm. I stepped between them, catching Frances by the shoulders and firmly pushing her back. I said, in a voice that was harder than I had ever used with her, "You need to leave now. If you ever come to my home uninvited again, I will call the police." She looked at me like I had just stabbed her, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "How can you do this to me?" And I said, "I am not doing anything to you. I am just refusing to let you do anything more to me. There is a difference." Frances left my apartment that day, but she did not leave my life. Over the next 2 weeks, she launched what could only be described as a campaign to win me back. She called constantly from different numbers, sent dozens of text messages that ranged from apologetic to angry to desperately sad, and showed up everywhere she thought I might be. She came to my office building and waited in the lobby until security escorted her out. She appeared at the gym I went to and tried to talk to me while I was in the middle of a workout. She even contacted my parents, crying and begging them to convince me to give her another chance. My mother, who had initially been sympathetic to Frances, despite everything, quickly lost patience. When Frances suggested that I was being manipulated by Emily and needed to be saved from making a terrible mistake. My mother told her, in no uncertain terms, that I was a grown man capable of making my own decisions, and that maybe if Frances had thought about consequences before abandoning me at our wedding, we would not be in this situation. The breaking point came 2.5 weeks after the wedding that never happened. I was at dinner with Emily at a restaurant we had chosen specifically because it was across town from anywhere Frances would normally go. We were having a genuinely good time, the kind of easy, comfortable evening that I had rarely experienced with Frances because there was always some undercurrent of tension about Henry, or work, or whatever drama was currently consuming her attention. Emily made me laugh in a way I had forgotten was possible, and I was just thinking about how lucky I was to have found something real in the wreckage of my failed relationship when Frances appeared at our table. She was not alone. Henry was with her, looking uncomfortable and apologetic, and behind them were Frances's parents, looking stern and disappointed in a way that suggested they had been summoned specifically to witness this confrontation. Frances slammed her hand down on the table hard enough to make the wine glasses rattle and said, "Enough. Matthew. This has gone on long enough. We need to talk about us. About our future. About fixing what went wrong." I looked at her calmly and said, "There is no us, there is no future, and there is nothing to fix, because I am not broken. You cannot fix something that is not broken. Frances, you can only accept that it is gone." She ignored me completely and turned on Emily, saying, "And you snake. You have been waiting for this. Have not you, waiting for your chance to steal my life? Well, you cannot have him. He loves me. We are supposed to be married." Emily, showing remarkable composure considering her sister was having a meltdown in the middle of a crowded restaurant, said, "He does not love you anymore, Frances, and honestly, can you blame him?" That was when Henry, who had been standing awkwardly behind Frances trying to make himself invisible, finally spoke up. He said, "Matthew, I want to apologize. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to come between you and Frances. If I had known she would leave your wedding for me, I never would have called her." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since this whole disaster began. And I saw exactly what Frances could not or would not see. He was weak. Not physically weak, but weak in character, the kind of person who created chaos, and then stood back and watched other people clean it up. He was not malicious. I did not think he was deliberately trying to ruin my life, but he was selfish in the way that people who think the world revolves around them are always selfish. He genuinely believed that his problems were more important than anyone else's happiness, and Frances had spent years enabling that belief. I said, "Henry, I do not care about your apology. I do not care about your intentions, and I do not care about whatever relationship you have, or do not have with Francis. What I care about is that I am trying to have dinner with someone who actually respects me, and you are all interrupting that." Francis's father, who had been silent up until this point, finally intervened. He said, "Matthew, you are being unreasonable. Francis made a mistake, yes, but she has apologized repeatedly, and she clearly still loves you. The least you can do is hear her out properly." I turned to him and said something I had been wanting to say for weeks. I said, "With all due respect, sir, your daughter did not make a mistake. She made a choice. She chose to value Henry's manufactured crisis over our wedding, over our relationship, over my dignity. And now she has to live with that choice. I am not being unreasonable by refusing to pretend it did not happen." Francis's mother, who had always liked me and had been genuinely excited about our wedding, looked at her daughter with something like disappointment and said, "Francis, maybe. He is right. Maybe you need to accept that some things cannot be fixed." Francis spun around to stare at her mother, betrayal written all across her face, and said, "You are supposed to be on my side. You are my mother." Her mother replied, "I am on your side, sweetheart. But being on your side does not mean lying to you. You hurt this man badly, and he has every right to walk away from you." That was apparently the final straw for Francis. She turned back to me, and I saw something shift in her expression, something hard and angry, replacing the desperate sadness that had been there before. She said, "Fine, Matthew, if this is how you want it, then fine, but do not come crawling back to me when you realize that Emily is just using you to get back at me for being the successful sister." I stood up then, tired of this entire spectacle. Tired of Francis's inability to accept responsibility for her own actions. Tired of being treated like I was the villain in a story where I had done nothing except refuse to accept being treated as second best. I said, "I will not come crawling back, Francis, because I am not the one who spent the last 2 weeks begging for a second chance. That was you. I am happy now, happier than I have been in a long time. And if you cannot accept that, then that is your problem, not mine." I pulled out my wallet, left enough money on the table to cover our meal plus a generous tip because our server did not deserve to be caught in the middle of this drama, and took Emily's hand. I said, "We are leaving, and I would appreciate it if none of you followed us." Francis started to say something else, but Emily cut her off. She said, "He blocked your number for a reason. Francis. He does not want to talk to you. He does not want to see you. He does not want anything to do with you. When are you going to accept that?" We left the restaurant with Francis's family still standing there looking shocked and Francis herself looking like her entire world had just collapsed. In the car, Emily was quiet for a long time before finally saying, "I am sorry you had to deal with that. I am sorry, my family ambushed you like that. I did not know they were planning it." I squeezed her hand and said, "It is not your fault, and honestly, I am glad it happened. Because now Francis cannot say I did not give her closure. She got her confrontation. She got to say everything she wanted to say, and I still chose to walk away. Maybe now she will finally accept that it is over." Emily looked at me with concern and asked, "Are you okay? Really okay?" And I realized with some surprise that I was. I said, "Yes, I am okay. I am better than okay, actually, I am free." The next day, I received a call from my lawyer. Francis had apparently contacted him to ask about the legal implications of our cancelled wedding, specifically whether I could sue her for the deposits we had lost on the venue and vendors. My lawyer, who had been skeptical of Francis from the beginning and had made no secret of his opinion that I was better off without her, sounded almost gleeful when he told me that yes, technically I could sue her for breach of promise, though he did not recommend it because it would be expensive and messy and would keep me tied to her through the legal system for months. I told him I had no intention of suing her, that I just wanted to move on with my life and forget she existed. He said that was the smartest thing I had said in months, and then he asked if the rumors he had heard about me and Emily were true. I confirmed that, yes, Emily and I were seeing each other. And he said, "Good. She always seemed like the smarter sister anyway." That conversation gave me an idea. I called Emily and asked if she would be willing to attend a charity gala with me the following weekend. It was an event I had planned to attend with Francis, a high-profile evening where everyone who was anyone in our social circle would be present. Francis would definitely be there because her company was one of the sponsors, and I wanted to make a very public statement about having moved on. Emily understood immediately what I was proposing, and after a moment of hesitation, she agreed. She said, "You know this is going to cause a scene, you know Francis is going to lose her mind when she sees us together in public." And I said, "I know, I am counting on it." She laughed, that low, warm laugh that I was quickly becoming addicted to, and said, "Okay, Matthew, if we are doing this, we are doing it right. I am going to look so stunning that everyone in that room will wonder how Francis ever let you go." The week leading up to the gala passed quickly, filled with work and planning and surprisingly little drama from Francis. She had gone quiet after the restaurant confrontation, and while I did not trust that the silence would last, I appreciated the reprieve. Emily and I spent more and more time together, and what had started as mutual support in the aftermath of Francis's betrayal was becoming something deeper and more real. I found myself telling her things I had never told Francis, trusting her with vulnerabilities I had always hidden because I did not want to seem weak. Emily never made me feel weak for having feelings or needs or boundaries. She just listened and understood and somehow always knew exactly what I needed to hear. I was falling for her, and while part of me worried that it was too fast, that I was rebounding from Francis and would regret it later, a larger part of me knew that what I felt for Emily was different from what I had ever felt for Francis. This felt solid and real and uncomplicated in the best possible way. The night of the gala arrived with a sense of anticipation that had been building all week. Emily showed up at my apartment, wearing a dress that literally made me forget how to speak for approximately 10 seconds. It was deep emerald green, elegant and sophisticated, and when she smiled at my reaction, I knew that whatever happened tonight, I had already won. We arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that was calculated to draw attention. The moment we walked into the ballroom, conversations stopped. People stared. Someone actually gasped. I could feel the weight of everyone's curiosity and judgment, but I did not care. I had Emily's hand in mine, and I had nothing to be ashamed of. We made our way through the crowd, stopping to chat with people I knew, accepting congratulations from friends who had heard about Emily and me and were genuinely happy for me. David found us early in the evening, greeting Emily warmly and pulling me aside to say, "You look happy. Really happy. Happier than I have seen you in years." I realized he was right. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pain and humiliation of being abandoned at my own wedding, I was happy. I had escaped a relationship that would have slowly suffocated me, and I had found someone who made me feel valued and respected and genuinely cared for. It was not the ending I had planned, but it was better than the one I would have had if Francis had actually married me. We had been at the gala for about an hour when Francis finally appeared. She was wearing red, which I knew was a deliberate choice because red was her power color, the color she wore when she wanted to command attention and project confidence, but she did not look confident tonight. She looked pale and strained, and when her eyes landed on Emily and me standing together with my arm around Emily's waist, I watched her face crumble. She started walking toward us with determination, and I braced myself for another confrontation. But before she could reach us, Henry intercepted her. He grabbed her arm and tried to pull her in a different direction, speaking to her urgently in a low voice I could not hear. Francis yanked her arm away from him and said, loud enough for people nearby to hear, "I do not need you to protect me. Henry, I can handle this myself." That was when I saw something I had been suspecting for weeks, but had never been able to confirm. Henry looked at Francis with an expression of such obvious longing and heartbreak that it was almost painful to witness. He was in love with her, completely and hopelessly, and everyone who saw that look on his face knew it immediately. The whispers started instantly, people putting together pieces they had not seen before, realizing that the man Francis had abandoned me for was not just a friend in need but someone who had deeper feelings for her. I wondered if Francis knew, if she had any idea that Henry's constant crises were manufactured specifically to keep her close to him, or if she was really as oblivious as she seemed. Either way, it did not matter anymore. It was not my problem. Francis finally reached us, and before she could say anything, Emily spoke. She said, "Hello Francis, you look lovely tonight. Red is definitely your color." It was such a perfectly civil, perfectly polite greeting that it somehow made the situation even more awkward. Francis ignored her completely and looked directly at me. She said, "Matthew, we need to talk, please. Just give me 5 minutes alone." I shook my head and said, "There is nothing left to say. Francis, we have already had this conversation multiple times. The answer is not going to change." She looked like I had slapped her, and I saw tears starting to form in her eyes. She said, "You really do not love me anymore, do you? You have really moved on with my sister." I took a deep breath and decided to give her the honesty she had been asking for. I said, "I did love you, Francis. I loved you for 5 years. I loved you enough to want to spend my life with you, but you did not love me enough to choose me when it mattered. And I cannot build a future with someone who will always put someone else first." She started to argue, started to say that she did choose me, that she had come back, but I interrupted her. I said, "You came back after you chose him, That is not the same thing. You made your decision on our wedding day, and now I have made mine. Emily squeezed my hand in silent support, and I continued, I am not angry anymore. I am not trying to hurt you. I am just done. I hope you find happiness. Frances, I genuinely do. But you are not going to find it with me. Frances looked between Emily and me, and I saw the moment when she finally accepted that I was serious, that this was really over, that nothing she could say or do would change my mind. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded slowly. She said, very quietly, I am sorry, Matthew. I am so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you. I replied, I know you did not, but you did hurt me, and I cannot pretend that did not happen, just because you are sorry now. She turned to Emily, then. And I tensed, ready to intervene if she said something cruel, but instead, Frances surprised me. She said, take care of him. Emily. He deserves someone who will put him first. Emily nodded and said, I know he does, and I will. With that, Frances turned and walked away. Henry trailing behind her like a lost puppy. And I knew that was the last real conversation I would ever have with her. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne and dancing and genuine celebration. People kept approaching me to say they were happy for me, that they could see I was better off, that Emily and I seemed like a much better match than Frances and I had ever been. My parents arrived later in the evening, and my mother hugged Emily with real warmth, telling her she was welcome in the family anytime. My father pulled me aside and said, son, I am proud of you. It takes real strength to walk away from someone you love when they do not treat you right. You made the right choice. His approval meant more than I had expected it to, and I felt something settle in my chest, some final piece of doubt or guilt that I had been carrying around finally dissolving. Emily and I left the gala around midnight, tired but happy, and drove back to my apartment in comfortable silence. When we got inside, she kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief and said, well, that was quite a night. How are you feeling? I pulled her close and said, I am feeling like I just closed one chapter of my life and started a much better one. She smiled and kissed me gently, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. Walking away from Frances had been painful, but it had also been necessary. I had spent too long being second best, too long making excuses for behavior that should never have been acceptable, too long convincing myself that love meant tolerating being undervalued. In the weeks and months that followed, I heard occasional updates about Frances through the social circle we had once shared. She and Henry had finally admitted their feelings for each other and were apparently attempting a relationship, though from what I heard, it was complicated and messy and full of the same drama that had always characterized their interactions. I felt no satisfaction in hearing that she was struggling, but I also felt no desire to reach out or offer support. That part of my life was over, and I was fully committed to moving forward rather than looking back. Emily and I grew closer every day, building something that felt stable and healthy and real. We talked about the future with an ease I had never experienced with Frances, making plans that did not have to account for someone else's constant emergencies or emotional needs. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, Emily and I got engaged. It was a quiet, private moment, just the two of us on a beach at sunset. And when I asked her to marry me, she said yes without hesitation. We planned a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family, nothing elaborate or showy, just a celebration of commitment between two people who genuinely valued each other. I did not invite Frances, but I heard later that she had found out about the engagement through social media, and had finally stopped trying to contact me. I hoped that meant she had found some peace, that she had accepted that we were both better off apart than we ever would have been together. Our wedding day arrived, and this time, there were no last-minute emergencies, no phone calls from people in crisis, no hesitation or doubt. Emily walked down the aisle toward me with a smile that was just for me, and when we said our vows, I knew with absolute certainty that I was marrying the right person. David stood beside me as my best man, and he whispered just before the ceremony started, "This is how it is supposed to feel, Matthew. This is what it looks like when someone actually wants to marry you." He was right. This was what it felt like to be chosen first, to be valued and respected and genuinely loved without conditions or competition. Frances did not show up to try to stop the wedding, did not send a message or make any attempt to interfere, and I was grateful for that small mercy. I heard months later that she and Henry had broken up, that their relationship had collapsed under the weight of expectations and history and unresolved issues, and that she had moved to a different city to start over somewhere new. I wished her well, genuinely, because holding on to anger and resentment would only have hurt me. She had taught me valuable lessons about boundaries and self-respect, and the importance of being with someone who chooses you consistently, not just when it is convenient. Those lessons were painful to learn, but they had led me to Emily, and for that, I would always be grateful. Standing at my own wedding, actually married this time to someone who had proven over and over that I was her priority, I felt the last lingering shadows of my relationship with Frances finally disappear. This was my new beginning, my real future, and it was better than anything I had imagined on that terrible day when Frances left me at the altar. Sometimes, the best thing that can happen to you is someone showing you clearly that they are not right for you, freeing you to find someone who is. Frances had done that, perhaps not intentionally, but she had done it nonetheless. And now, holding Emily's hand and looking into her eyes as we were pronounced husband and wife, I finally understood that being abandoned at the altar had not been the end of my story. It had been the beginning.